So you've already had two very successful novels, and when I was thinking about it, one of the things that seemed to me to be in common is that in one of the novels you talk about a grandson's effort to a certain extent to understand his grandfather's history or his background a little bit better, and then in another book the son is struggling to understand his father, the missing father. Is there anything behind that you picked those themes, that those themes appear in both books?
Well, they're very timeless themes. They're, as I find it surprising that people would write about anything else. Actually, who doesn't wrestle with where he comes from? Those are the two questions everyone is constantly asking of himself. Where am I going, and where do I come from? And the second helps to answer the first. In my case, my family's history, because of the war, sort of begged these investigations. I had a lot of missing relatives, missing grandparents. My parents were always present and there, but sometimes the things you write about can be kind of stand-ins or metaphors for other things that you're thinking about, worrying about. I don't write from a position of therapy or analysis of myself. It's just that I find it seems to be impossible not to write about the things that I've been thinking about and having strong feelings about. Often I won't realize I was having those thoughts or feelings until I've written them. So before my first book, if someone had said, do you think of your relationships to your grandparents as being particularly important or critical in your life, I don't know that I would have said yes. But then I wrote the book, and I feel like it was a piece of proof to me, or a different kind of like a reflection sent back at me. So while I didn't write these two books about young people searching for relatives, connections to relatives, in any kind of autobiographical or memoir way, it seems to me it must be the case that it was in response to my own
to something that was going on. You also tackled two catastrophes. I mean, two books, two catastrophes: the Holocaust, 9/11. These are not small little. I mean, you're certainly focused on the personal aspect of both of them and how it affects individuals. Any thoughts about why you've been catastrophic up until now?
Well, in part because when you write something, you're going to devote 2 years or 3 years or 4 years or 5 years to it, and you're going to devote what you think of as the best of your energy. Your most concentrated self, your most deliberate self, your most sensitive self. And the first concern is, am I devoting all of this energy to the right thing? So I don't think that a tragedy or a catastrophe is necessarily the right thing. I think that the right thing, to me, seems like a story that gets at something deep about emotions that we all share. And while my second book, for example, could be described as a book about September 11th, that's not really the way that I think about it. I think of it as being a book about loss, about the battle between the imagination and reality, about the difficulty in communicating, about missed human connections, and the backdrop is clearly September 11th, and that felt inevitable at the time just because I was a New Yorker, and again, as I said, I find it very hard not to write about things that I'm thinking about or having strong feelings about. But I don't think of that. I think to me it's the canvas, not the painting. And I hope that if anybody reads the book in 5 years or 10 years, it'll be looked at slightly differently as there's more time between readers and that event. I hope the book is seen more for the themes that are coming.
All right, so let me pick up on that last comment where you said you hope with more time between the event. Do you think it was at all risky to try to deal with something that was so fresh in the imagination? Because obviously the Holocaust is a big theme, and even if you deal with a personal issue, it's a big theme. But you have 60 years separating the reader, not all the readers. I mean, if my mother-in-law and father-in-law were reading it, for them it's still current events. They lived through it. But for most people reading your book, it's going to be something in the past. Everybody feels like they were witnesses. Almost everyone who read your book, I'm sure, and has some relationship to 9/11. So do you think that was risky territory at all?
Well, there are a lot of ways to think about that. One is, maybe it's risky if you're trying to create a definitive version. I mean, it'd be risky for a historian to write the definitive history of September 11th quickly, although they did that as well. Novels aren't trying to write definitive stories. They're trying to capture certain moments. So I'm sure that I would write a different book now, and in 10 years I would write a different book, but that doesn't imply that I regret writing the book that I did then. And the other thing I would say is I think writing is held up to a very unusual standard in just culturally in its responses to tragedies. You know, imagine if somebody said to a New York Times reporter on September 12th, don't you think it's a little bit early to be writing about this event? And that's like a preposterous question. Everybody would say, no, of course not. That's what a journalist would be grossly negligent if he didn't cover September 11th on September 12th. So what is the faith that we have in that kind of storytelling that we don't have in novels? I mean, it's interesting because, you know, what is at stake when a novel fails? Well, not that much, actually. I mean, a novelist's career, I suppose, but no country's going to go to war because of a novel. What's at stake when the New York Times makes mistakes? Well, some might say we went into Iraq because of, you know, mistakes the New York Times made. So it's interesting that we put so much emphasis on a novelist getting it right, not making mistakes, being suspicious of a novelist's decisions, and we give such free rein to journalists when, in fact, you know, the stakes are disproportionate.
Higher. Yeah. Well, I mean, the part of it, I mean, I think we understand this. You know, critics have to write something, so part of it is just looking for something that sounds a little clever, you know, to write about. But I think you hit it when you said that you weren't really trying to provide a definitive interpretation, some kind of global understanding on a cosmic level of what 9/11 was about. But on the other hand, I think what was strong about it is that you gave us, through the voice of one little boy, one little window in to that event. And although there was much more to the book, obviously, than just the 9/11, but you gave him a voice, and you gave us a way to understand at least part of the event. And I agree with you. I didn't get the sense you were trying to give the the definitive approach to 9/11. You use a lot of graphics. You use what would be considered to be unorthodox or unconventional design aspects in the book. Where does that come from? I mean, how I'm sure you've been asked that often, so you've had a lot of time to think about that particular issue.
Well, my answer changes over time.
All right, so you give me whatever answer you like for today.
I mean, again, I come back to this, why do we ask certain things of novelists and not of other artists or other people who are making things? You know, if I were a painter and I put text in my painting, nobody would think twice about it. And painters have been doing that for literally hundreds of years. I mean, some of the first paintings had text in them. So why is it so noteworthy when images infiltrate a novel? The reason is because the novel's been such a conservative art form. Or rather, the form of it has been very conservative. I didn't grow up wanting to be a novelist. It really wasn't on my radar. It wasn't something that I dreamt about. If somebody had told me, even in college, that I would become a novelist, I might have been somewhat surprised. I really came to it through the back door, and I think because of that, there are advantages and disadvantages to that. One advantage is that you don't have any great reverence for the form. You know, I really think of the novel as my vehicle, not as my destination. So when I'm working on something, and it seems to me that a slightly modified form will better be a more efficient vehicle, then I change it. You know, and if someone says to me, well, they're not going to shelve it with novels, I don't go cry under my sheets. You know, it's not, I say, fine, I never wanted exactly to be a novelist. So I feel very free. There are some disadvantages, too. Like, one of the reasons novels have survived and thrived for so long is because a very good form actually has been established, something that seems to be an extremely good vehicle. And having some reverence for that and forcing your thought into that can be very good.
So, would you say this is in some ways just another incarnation of illustration? I mean, some of the design aspects, because illustrations have certainly been, you know, parts of the book. I'm on a Dickens kick this year, so reading all the Dickens things that I hadn't read, and most of the editions that I have some kinds of very stylized illustrations.
I don't think of them as illustrations because that implies that they come after the text.
I see.
When for me it was a real back and forth. Sometimes I would see an image and then write the scene around the image rather than finding an image for a scene. So I think of them equally as just interacting. I don't even think of them differently, to be honest. I just think of the book. It's an object. It's like asking a painter, was the orange illustrating the blue? No, they were the two colors that, filled out the composition.
There's a lot of what's referred to often as stream of consciousness in some of the books. And one of the things that I was thinking about, and I don't know why this occurred to me, but it sort of occurred to me, the difference between television and radio. That one of the things that people who lived in the radio generation said that you had to spend a lot of time with radio imagining a lot of it. In stream of consciousness, you give us what's going on inside the mind of the character rather than let us infer it through action and through conversation. Are there pluses and minuses of doing it different ways?
There are. And, I've never written a whole book in any voice, actually. I mean, my books are composites of different voices. And part of it is exactly the disadvantages and advantages of any one method of storytelling. There's so many ways to describe the very same thing. Us talking to each other right now, a physicist would describe it one way, a chemist, a historian, a journalist, a novelist, a poet, a painter, and each story is as valuable as the next. But they're different. They accomplish different things. And even within one kind of storytelling, what we might think of as one kind of storytelling, like novel writing, there are many different ways, manners of telling stories. So you can get inside someone's head and do a stream of conscious. You can do a third person, kind of omniscient narration of it. You can do a first person monologue. You could simply, describe actions and have absolutely no dialogue or internal thoughts whatsoever. And each of those things presents a different way into the story. So when I'm writing, it's like an exploration. What are all the tools that I have? How can I get in? I never map it out in advance. I don't say this is going to be a first-person novel. This is going to be a third-person novel. I try to find what's at the heart of the book, and then how fully can I explore it. And at a certain point, you might do too much, and so it starts to lose connection to its heart. And I hope I've struck the right balance in the two that I've written, but I don't foresee in the future always writing in that way. I mean, I have no aversion to the idea of writing a traditional first person.
Yeah. And I may have had the wrong impression, but one of the impressions I got from reading previous interviews with you is that when you write, you're also open to re-engineering the book at some point in terms of what goes where and order. Is that correct?
Yeah, but I'd be surprised if you found a writer who didn't feel that way.
So it's just normative to...
I would think so. I mean, maybe there are writers who have a lot of faith in their formulas. I'm not such a writer, and I don't know writers like that. The ones that I know, in their own different ways and to different extents, think of it as an exploration, as a journey, that you don't know the destination. Even if you know what the story is that you're telling, there's a great, Joseph Brodsky said, the rhyme is smarter than the poet. And oftentimes in writing, it feels like you're submitting to an intelligence that isn't your own. And I don't mean that you're appealing to something above.
Right.
I just mean the accidents that happen, the fortuity, the moving things around and seeing that they happen to be better that way, which isn't what you'd planned. So that's what I get most excited about, and in part because I don't think I could write the kind of book I wanted to write on purpose. I'm not all that interested in fulfilling my potential. My potential doesn't excite me, really.
Yeah.
I'm interested in transcending it, and so you find various ways, there are tools you can find to actually transcend your own potential, like getting in the way of good accidents. So I think that was what I meant.
Let me conclude with a question having to do a little bit with the Jewish element, to the extent as it might be expressed in your writing. But I want to take it from a different kind of place. Certainly in the American Jewish experience, Jews are overrepresented, just in terms of the percent they are of the community in the creative arts, in writing in particular. Any thoughts about why that might be, or either on a general level?
It's actually in writing exclusively, I think. They have not had they've had a surprisingly small presence in painting.
Yeah, painting. Actually, I was thinking more, frankly, of the creative writing.
Although it's interesting why, if you start to explore why in the visual arts they haven't had the same presence.
I'm sure it's the biblical injunction. I'm sure it's on everyone's mind.
That's what's on my mind.
Absolutely.
But Why? I'm not sure it's true anymore.
In your generation?
Yeah, it certainly was true in the 50s.
Mm-hmm.
It was very true in the 50s, 60s, maybe 70s, maybe 80s. Probably not even the 80s. I don't know. There seems to be a kind of reemergence, but that could just as well be attributed to a reemergence of Jewish readers.
Mm-hmm.
The things that gain popularity aren't necessarily the best things out there. They're the things that the readers latch onto, and that can be due to any number of reasons that can be totally disconnected from the quality of the book. We'll have to wait and see. A lot of things that seem important in the moment disappear, and things that didn't seem all that important appear. So
we have the theory of Jewish marginality, that despite the acceptance of Jews in American society, and it's 13 senators out of 100, 6 times the proportion of Jews in the population, but nevertheless that, you scratch the average American Jew and you're going to find a little bit of sense of the outsider looking in. And then traditionally the conventional wisdom has been that the outsider looks at society differently and in some ways very often has a more creative input. Do you buy into that at all?
I do. I mean, it helps explain a lot of, the prominence of gay artists in the 80s and 90s, black, music and black visual arts. It's dangerous, though, because when we talk about Jewish writing, we're talking about the number of writers you can count on 2 hands, basically. When we think about important writers in the 50s or in the 60s, if we talk about the canon of Jewish literature, you're talking about, Bellow and Roth and Malamud and Cynthia Ozick and Susan Sontag. It's not a lot. So when the numbers are so small, it's easy for things to get disproportionate very quickly. That having been said, obviously, in the past, Jews have put an enormous emphasis, immigrant Jews in particular, on education. And it's hard to imagine writing that didn't flow from education, kind of bookishness and emphasis on texts, on study. There's no way to I mean, there probably are ways. I don't know of ways to talk about or prove these things now, but anecdotally speaking, it seems like that emphasis is, if not totally gone, then greatly diminished. And I have to imagine that will be reflected in the writers we produce.
So we have to be thankful that you're still around, huh?
I'm thankful I'm still around, but for different reasons.
Good.